It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You go to emailrevealer.com, you can get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator, and all kinds of services. Check out the website. There's all kinds of things we can do for you. If you think your husband or your wife is cheating on you, you send us their email address. We could trace them back to online dating websites and catch them cheating online at emailrevealer.com. Also, check out OppermanReport.com. That is our radio show website. On that website, we have exclusive shows, additional shows that you won't find live on Friday night, you won't find live on Saturday night. These are shows that are exclusive to the website to members. You have to become a member, and you get this additional content, but it also helps support the shows on Friday and Saturday. We also have a document section at OppermanReport.com. I just got a 23-page letter, for instance. It's an exhibit in the Jeffrey Epstein case, and believe it or not, it talks about how Jeffrey Epstein, according to his attorney, Gerald Lefcourt, that Jeffrey Epstein was part of the founding of the Clinton Foundation, that he was one of the initial founders and helped create the Clinton Foundation. This convicted pedophile, ladies and gentlemen, was a part of the Clinton Foundation and its inception. So, 23-page letter, and that's up there on the Opperman Report member section. Got a very special show for you today. Fascinating story. We have Billy Wayne Sinclair. He's written a couple of books, A Life in the Balance, the Billy Wayne Sinclair story, and another one, Crime, Courage, Redemption, the journey of Billy and Jodi Sinclair. Incredible 40 years in prison. Then he managed to get out, and we're going to be hearing the whole story today. Mr. Sinclair, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Introduce yourself to the audience and let us know exactly who is Billy Wayne Sinclair.
In a nutshell, it was a very confused teenager, young man. Ed, I'm getting a back feed. Can you call me on my cell number?
Yeah. Okay, we'll start over on the cell phone. Okay.
830.
No. I got it. I'll call you right back. Okay, what we're going to do is, I'm just going to do this on the fly. I'm going to call him right back. Okay, it's going to take me a couple of minutes. I'll make a little announcement while I'm setting this up and getting that other phone number. And to make an announcement, a lot of you guys may know that I broadcast the show on Awake Radio. And it's on there live Friday nights and Saturday nights, and they also carry the after show. What we've done is, Awake Radio was just about to go out of business. As a matter of fact, stopped paying their bills altogether, and their broadcaster got shut off. So I've taken over Awake Radio. I'm going to be managing over there and booking new hosts and new shows on there. So if you're interested in hosting a show, I know that a lot of people out there that are radio hosts or station owners all listen to this show. So what you can do is you can contact me at oppermanreport@gmail.com. And what we'll do is, if you already have a show, send me a clip of your show, a recent broadcast that I can check out. If you don't have a show going on, just send me an idea of what you want to do, what kind of show you want to produce, what you're interested in doing, and hopefully we can get you there right on the schedule. So as soon as I get this phone number here, Billy Wayne Sinclair, I'll be giving him a call on his cell phone rather than his home phone. Okay. All right. I'm almost there. Any second now. Okay. All right. Put that in there. And then it's going to start ringing. Any second, you hear it ringing. Don't forget my...
Billy Sinclair.
Oh, boy. Hey, Billy, that's so much better. I hear you so much clearer. How about me? Do you hear me better?
Yeah. Yes, we live up here in the hill country, and we have satellite telephone, landline telephone. The reception sometimes gets real flaky.
Oh, my God, this is so much better. Okay, great. So just as we were going, tell us about yourself. Who is Billy Wayne Sinclair?
In a nutshell, if you look at it strictly from the point of view of my involvement in the criminal justice system, it's a teenager who, went and the prison was initially sentenced to death and spent nearly 7 years on death row, and following Furman v. Georgia in 1972 when the Supreme Court effectively abolished the death penalty across the country. I was one of the 408 inmates that had his sentence reduced to life imprisonment. And from that point in time, I became a prison activist, a jailhouse lawyer, was very much involved in the early 1970s with integration of prison systems and fighting for prisoner rights and what have you. And ultimately, I became a member of the prison newspaper, The Angleite. My association with that magazine over the next years garnered myself and the magazine prestigious journalism awards, from the George Polk to the Robert F. Kennedy Special Journalism Award, the ABA Silver Gavel, the City Hillman Award, and a host of other awards, and became a model of rehabilitation. And in 1986, not through any investigative efforts with the prison publication, I became aware of a massive pardon selling scandal that was taking place. It was going on in the prison system, particularly at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. And there was linked to this corruption all the way to the governor's office. Governor Edmund Edwards was the governor at the time. And I was approached with a opportunity to buy a pardon for $20,000. And my wife and I discussed that and talked about it, and I knew that it had to be dealt with and it had to be reported, but it could not be reported through the prison publication because that simply would have got me killed. So my wife, her brother at the time was a United States congressman. Her cousin was a United States congressman, and we contacted him, and he put us in touch with the FBI. Long story short, an ensuing investigation led to the indictment of the pardon board chairman and a number of other prison officials, and exposed a massive crime network in the state penitentiary that was led by the Dixie Mafia. And this group eventually, while at the state penitentiary, was responsible for having a state court judge in Biloxi, Mississippi, him and his wife murdered. So I was at the center of all these developments that was taking place, and was put into protective custody, where I was kept for the next 15, 16 years before I was finally able to work my way back in the general population, general inmate population, where I remained for the next 3 years before I was granted parole in 2006. And my wife and I were married 25 years. We got married while I was in prison, and we were married for 25 years. And she fought tooth and nail to get me out, and managed to do so. And so when I got out, we went to Houston, Texas, where I went to work. Had to go to college, and had to hone myself up on Texas criminal law, which I did, and got a job as a paralegal with a law firm, the John T. Floyd Law Firm, in Houston, Texas. And my wife and I lived in Houston till 2012, when we bought a home in Texas Hill Country, which is about 40 miles from San Antonio, and that's where we currently reside and live.
So, you got arrested in 1972, is that correct?
1965.
1965, my God, I was born in 1962. Oh, my God. Okay,
Well, I was arrested 65.
1965.
And I got out. And I got out in 2006.
Now, how old were you in 1965?
20 years old.
20 years old. Now, and you said it was a convenience store robbery. You went in there and someone got shot, right?
Yes, it was a botched robbery attempt. I went in to rob the store. The convenience store clerk resisted the robbery. As he came around, he chased me outside the store, and as I fled running across the parking lot of the store, I fired a shot behind me, and that shot went under his left armpit and traveled across his chest cavity and severed his aorta, and he bled to death.
Right. Now, was that the first robbery you had done?
No, I had done several other robberies, myself and another guy. With this robbery, this was the first robbery I had committed by myself. He and I had committed 4 other robberies together. And the robbery murder was a culmination of that very brief, about a 5-week crime spree that led to my conviction and death sentence.
So now, after you tried this botched robbery and you shot this guy, you must have been having a heart attack, right? As you were.
Well, I did. I mean, yeah. I mean, you have no way of. I did not know if it had been. It would have been a normal routine botched robbery, except that this gentleman was very well liked and very well connected into the community, particularly Baton Rouge sports community. He played on the same high school football team with LSU's Heisman Trophy winning Billy Cannon. So there was a lot of built-in political opposition that came with the case, and that opposition was very stiff, and it remained so for 40 years. Finally, I was able to overcome the opposition and secure my release.
Before we get to that, though, now how did it come about that you were caught for this crime? Did you talk to someone? Someone ratted you out? What happened?
Well, no. Once it was very easy for the police to know that I had committed the robbery because I had committed with this other guy
right.
a robbery some weeks before in the same community. Well, they had both our pictures, and then they knew who did this. So when this robbery occurred, they went over there and showed both our pictures to the witnesses, and one of them immediately pointed me out. So they knew the very same night who had committed the crime. And then after crime was committed, I went to California, to San Diego, where I went to see my father, who alerted the FBI, and that's how the capture took place.
Oh, your father turned you into the FBI? Is that what you said?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, my God. Did you ever reconcile with him, or did you ever forgive him, or how did that go?
Well, there was if you in Life in the Balance, I chronicled a very, very brutal relationship between my father and I, and the child abuse and the stuff that took place during our family and our household. So it was one of those kind of things where I tried to reconcile, and I went to San Diego because my brother was working out there with my father, and I thought, well, in my immature pea brain kind of mind, I thought, well, maybe they can help me get into Mexico and I can get away, and that was a thought process. But when I got there, the FBI had already contacted all my family members, and of course, when I went there and I called my father, called a place where he worked, and I went there to meet him and my brother. The FBI was waiting instead. So he died in 1976, and there was a lot of bitterness, but as I grew in prison and as I evolved and matured, that hatred, that relationship, that bitter relationship, just dissipated over time. And, when he died in 1976, by the time he died in 1976, I had pretty much buried all the skeletons from my past, from my youth, and no longer saw it as any kind of betrayal, but saw him doing what he felt that he had to do and needed to do. And I don't know what his true motives were. I don't know if it was motivated by some kind of hatred of me or what it was. But, at that time, it was bygones be bygones, and there was nothing to do about it. And I couldn't live the rest of my life, not if I expected to become a decent human being. I couldn't spend the rest of my life hating my father.
How about the brother? Did you ever reconcile with him?
Yes, in fact, my brother and I, he's in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I saw him when I was still incarcerated a couple of years, about 3 or 4 years before I got out. And since I've been out, he lives in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and we frequently communicate by telephone, call and talk to each other. So, he had nothing to do with the decision of my father. He didn't even know I was coming out there because my father never told him,
Now, from the time, let me ask you this, from the time...
The relationship he and I have are just, two brothers that have had very little, not even any kind of relationship through our adult life. Last 5 or 6 years I was in prison. He started writing to me, and then I had a couple visits with him, and, so we got to sort of come back together and establish a relationship. And now we have a long-distance brother-on-brother relationship that is, is pretty entertaining and enjoyable.
Now, but from the time you committed the robbery to the time you were captured by the FBI, I believe you said San Diego, how much time elapsed? How much time were you on the run?
About 5 days. It was a Sunday night. The robbery occurred on Sunday night, December the 5th, and I was captured in National City, which is right outside of San Diego, that Saturday, the following Saturday, which was December 11th.
Now, so they capture you now. Did you go to trial? Did you plead guilty? What happened then?
No, there was a trial, and, I went through a whole series of attorneys. The court appointed me a number of attorneys, but each time I got an attorney on the case, political pressure was brought to bear, and each attorney withdrew from the case. And the last 2 lawyers that I had, the one that had prepared for trial, and he had been district attorney of this parish, East Baton Rouge Parish, where the crime occurred, so he was very much fused into the politics of the community. And on the day of my trial, he walked away. And so I was left with an attorney who did not even really know the name of the victim, and that's who I went to trial with. And the trial lasted 5 days, and the jury was out 45 minutes and returned the verdict of guilty, which carried the mandatory death sentence.
Yeah, Louisiana has to be one of the most corrupt places on the face of the earth. Unless you've experienced it, people won't realize how bad it is down there. Now,
the thing about, one interesting thing is about there were 43 men on death row in 1972. And at that time, Opperman versus Georgia was pending before the Supreme Court. And everybody knew that, the court was going to rule one way or the other. And the governor at that time, who, again, was Edmund Edwards, he had stated that if the court upheld the death penalty, he was going to sign death warrants. And there was no question in my mind, because of the politics of my case, that this governor was going to pick a white inmate, to execute. He certainly wasn't going to start the process with an African-American inmate, because he had won the governor's mansion, won the governor's race, because he had strong political ties to the black community. So I was sitting there, one of 6 white inmates on death row, knowing that if the Supreme Court upheld the death penalty, that I would be the first to be executed.
So how many years were you on death row? Did you say 7 years on death row?
Yes.
Now so it's about from 21 then to about 28, right? You figure after a year-long trial. Now, now when you're on death row down there in Louisiana, are you 24 hours locked down? What's that like?
Yes. Well, the way it was, Ed, is that we were housed in individual cells.
Okay.
And when I first went to death row, you had no privileges. Everything was pretty much tight, and the conditions were really bad, really, really horrible. You couldn't. There was no medical services. There was no psychological services. There was simply, at that time, they still had inmate guards. The inmate guards, which was a very brutal regime, run death row. So, I was there and was sort of one of the more notorious inmates, and I started studying law and became a fairly good, skilled paralegal. So I started suing the prison over conditions on death row, and ultimately won the first prisoner rights lawsuit in the country at that time by having the conditions on death row declared unconstitutional. And prior to that time, we were only let out of our cells 3 times a week, 15 minutes a day to shower. And so when the court ruled, they brought about a disciplinary process that an inmate could not be disciplined without a write-up and without being given a formal disciplinary hearing. They had to give us exercise every day, 1 hour on a yard that they had built outside of death row, and 1 hour on the tier after we returned in from the yard. And that ruling came about, finally went into effect. The Supreme Court ruled in June of 72, and we got our first exercise outdoors in January of 1972. So it took that long of fighting to bring that about. And of course, having won that lawsuit made me a very well-known and popular inmate in the Louisiana prison system as being a top-notch jailhouse lawyer. And believe me, at the time I was not, but there was no measure for what was a not good jailhouse lawyer, because jailhouse lawyering was a new concept at that time. It had not been fully developed. The Supreme Court had ruled in 1968 that and recognized the right of a jailhouse lawyer to file petitions and to help other inmates. But by 1972 in Louisiana, there was no frame of reference. I was good because I was the only real one there.
Yeah, and you have to. The audience has to imagine. Here you got these guys on death row. They're not even getting 15 minutes every 3 days, right? But
yeah, we got Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
That's their whole world. That's their whole life, their whole world. And Billy Wayne Sinclair changed the whole world for these people. So it's like God, almost. Like to make such a drastic change in people's lives, that every facet of their life suddenly changed. Now, before you got arrested, were you a smart guy? Were you the kind of guy that could have had a chance to become a paralegal and become a real lawyer?
I was a high school dropout, and I was by no means a illiterate or stupid student. I mean, when I was in school, I did good, and then part of my troubles as a young man was being involved in the wrong crowd, smoking and drinking. And I'm not talking about smoking dope. I'm back then smoking was a bad
chewing gum. Chewing gum in class.
Yeah, so I was just but I was when I got on death row, I started reading, and next thing you know, I discovered a guy got off of death row who was a very intellectual kind of guy and left me a box of books, and so I started reading Thomas Wolfe, and I started reading Jean-Paul Sartre and every philosopher I could get my hands on, and just sort of educated myself. And then my study of the law began when I wrote this group in Texas and told them that I needed some legal help, and they sent me a whole set of law books. And at that time, the prison administration surprisingly let them in, and it was 4 volumes. And from that beginning, I started reading and developing concept. I started understanding what criminal evidence was. I started understanding what due process was, what constitutional rights were, what the original Bill of Rights were. So you start developing. And so, when I started filing litigation, when I started filing lawsuits, I'm sure that those initial ones were they were poorly crafted and not as well reasoned as my legal skills are today. But it's like anything else. The more you read, the more informed and the more intelligent you become. The more legal work you do, the better you become, because you're always striving to do better. It's like when I joined the Angellite in 1977. That was just a prison magazine. I mean, it was just a little, what they call a news rag. I mean, it was 5 or 6, 10 pages, and it was sent to the dormitories, and most of them ended up in a trash can before they was even read. So, but the Angellite, under my co-editorship with another individual named Wilburito, between the two of us, we transformed the magazine into this nationally acclaimed and internationally recognized, magazine that started winning all these journalism awards. I mean, it was unheard of for 2 inmates to win the George Polk Award, the Robert F. Kennedy Award, and the American Civil Gavel Award in the same year. It earned us appearances on CBS, NBC, ABC's Nightline with Ted Koppel. In fact, we was on a show with Ted Koppel with Chief Justice Warren Burger. So, I mean, you go from an uneducated inmate to sitting on national television live with the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
Amazing. Amazing. Now, so how did you get yourself off death row to general population? You got a life sentence after that, right? What was that?
Yeah, what happened when Furman came down, when the Supreme Court handed down Furman,
right?
Then the lower courts were forced to confront these cases. So in Louisiana, they decided all the inmates who were on death row would be resentenced to life imprisonment. So I was given a life sentence in October of 1972. And from that point, that's when I got off of death row, went into general population, became active in a whole the prison community there, becoming head of the prisoner grievance committee, becoming president of a number of organizations, being a jailhouse lawyer. I led the integration of the Angola. At that time, Angola was the bloodiest prison in the United States. It had a murder rate higher than per capita than Detroit City, which was the murder rate of the nation at that time. And, it was a very violent and brutal place. And I went in and became one of the leaders and became committed to keep young kids from being raped and sexually assaulted and trying to bring about improved conditions. There was all white guard staff there. They were mostly Southern rednecks who, were extremely racist and very violent people. And so through the grievance committee and the lawsuits, I started changing things, started helping changing things. And I didn't do all these things by myself. There was a group of other inmates who was actively involved in trying to bring about change as I was. But I garnered most of the attention because I was the jailhouse lawyer. So, it led to the integration of prison. And right after I integrated to prison, they set me up and locked me up and kept me in a max security lockdown for the next 2 years before I was able to win my release out of that lockdown and go back into general population where, I sort of when I got out in 75, I just sort of settled down and assumed a low profile in the prison setting, and ultimately the guy that Wilburito, who was the editor of the magazine, convinced the administration that he needed some help in the magazine, and he knew that I could write. He knew that I had skills, and those skills would serve his interests. And so, when we both got together, we became a pretty good team, and that relationship was remained intact and remained good throughout my whole tenure with the magazine. But once I exposed the pardons for sale scandal and the investigation of that pardons for sale scandal, realized that the corruption reached all the way into the magazine because 2 of the members of the Angellite staff had bought pardons.
Okay.
So I became persona non grata with the magazine, and particularly everybody else from the upper echelon of the other Department of Corrections in the prison system. You know, I had a bounty on my head, and the governor came close to being indicted. You know, there were a number of prison officials who got indicted and wound up being, given prison sentences and everything else. So it was really a nasty mess.
We'll get into this business about the pardon for sale when we get back from this break. But real quick, I wanted to ask you real quick before we take a break. We're with Billy Sinclair, A Life in the Balance, the Billy Sinclair story. You can find him at his website, too, johntfloyd.com. It's an attorney's office that he works for. But Billy, Angola prison during this period of time, this is like one of those prisons where they had the chain gangs, right? Working at the side of the road, all these guys chained together?
Well, but they know what they had. Angola didn't have chain gangs, but they had farm lines. They worked in the fields, you know. So it was a 18,000-acre prison plantation. You know, it used to be a slave plantation, you know, and it had been sold to the state, and the state turned it into a prison plantation.
While you were in prison, because I know you got out in 2006, but did you see the rise of the private prisons and prisons for profit, that kind of stuff?
I sure did. In fact, I wrote extensively about it when I was with the magazine. I was always...
Did I lose you? Yeah, I think we lost them. Let's check over here. We're going to have to play a commercial anyways. Let's do that. I think we lost one. This is your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. And if you're enjoying this... Okay, hey, Billy, I'm going to play a commercial now. Okay, I don't know how we lost you there, but I'm going to play a commercial. We'll be right back with more of Billy Wayne Sinclair. A Life in the Balance is one of the books. The other book is Crime, Courage, and Redemption, The Journey of Billy and Jodi Sinclair. We'll be right back after these messages. Again, a ton of shows, about 300 shows on air. And whenever we do an impromptu show, an emergency-type broadcast that we do during the week occasionally, you'll get an email notifying you of breaking news and spontaneous broadcasts that we may do during the week. You can also go to oppermanreport.com and become a member. If you become a member, you help support the free archives on Spreaker and YouTube, and you help support the free shows on Friday evening and on Saturday evening. Each of these shows, Friday evening and Saturday evening, are carried for free on 7 internet stations, okay? So you help support that, but also, too, at OppermanReport.com in the members section, we have exclusive content. Shows that are recorded during the week that are only available to members. So please check out OppermanReport.com and help support the show.
The son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement, Bernie Sanders. He went to public schools, then college, where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. Bernie moved to Vermont, won election and praise as one of America's best mayors. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families and for principle, opposing the Iraq War, supporting veterans. Now he's taking on Wall Street and a corrupt political system that holds up a rigged economy. Bernie's campaign is funded by over 1 million small contributions from people like you. He's fighting for living wages, equal pay, and tuition-free public colleges. Bernie Sanders.
People are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Bernie Sanders. Husband, father, grandfather, an honest leader, building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Check out strawmanmusic.com. Sean Duff is our webmaster here at the Opperman Report, and he's a very talented musician. He's part of a band called Strawman. They're based up there in Canada. Don't hold that against them. These are like-minded folks. If you like the shows you hear on the Opperman Report, you'll like the music that they have over at strawmanmusic.com.
Enough is enough. Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And then,
After getting a huge taxpayer bailout because they were too big to fail, it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. That's crazy. I'm Bernie Sanders. My plan: break up the big banks who are strangling our economy and make them pay their fair share of taxes. Then we can invest in the middle class, expand Social Security, and provide universal college education. I'll rein in Wall Street behavior so they can't crash our economy again. Will they like me? No. Will they begin to play by the rules if I'm president? You better believe it. I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
You know, you can get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Now, this is a limited edition book, okay? And you can get a signed copy of this book, and it'll be personally autographed to you or whoever you want to give the book to as a gift. Once you have my signature on that book, you can copy the signature and put it on checks and pass them all over the world. Emailrevealer.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator.
He's fought injustice and inequality his whole life. Bernie Sanders. As a college student, he was arrested for challenging segregated housing. Bernie marched with Dr. King and thousands of others for civil rights. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families on health care and jobs. Now he's taking on Wall Street banks and a corrupt political system that keeps in place a rigged economy. Bernie Sanders, a reformer who believes in ending racial profiling and mass incarceration so the justice system works for everyone. Bernie Sanders.
There is no president who will fight harder to end institutional racism and reform our broken criminal justice system.
Bernie Sanders, an honest leader building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here with Billy Wayne Sinclair. You can find him at johntfloyd.com. Also, Billy has a couple of books that he's written that you can find on Amazon.com. We'll also have him on the Opperman Report book store, OppermanReport.com bookstore. Crime, Courage, Redemption, The Journey of Billy and Jodie Sinclair, A Life in the Balance, the Billy Wayne Sinclair story. So, Mr. Sinclair, give us an idea with the rise of these prisons for profit. Some of the kind of things that go on. We take a lot of call from guys in prison, and we put them on the air as much as we can. We've got a lot of friends back there. But what about give people an idea, like these transportation, like they transport these inmates around the state for really no logical reason. They transfer them from one prison to another, and the private bus companies that do this, and the phone, the cost of making phone calls, that kind of stuff.
It's astronomical, the amount of money that the prison system gets from excuse me, from the inmate canteen to telephones to these transportation lines that you're talking about. I mean, the amount of money that the government subsidizes prison with is one thing, but these companies that work these deals, these telephone companies, these food distributors that provide items for the canteen, this is and it's astronomical, the markup that's on these store items and the telephone service and everything else. But the whole concept of a private prison is to generate as much profit as possible, involving the least amount of resources. So you're not going to have qualified prison staff because the staff, the people that work in private prisons, are not trained and don't have the abilities and the intellectual and physical skills like regular prison guards. These people that are bottom feeders, and they go to work in these private prisons. So you can imagine, you can just extrapolate from poor staff, a few resources being expended, what kind of living conditions you're going to have. Inmates have bad food, they have bad medical services, they have low security. Sexual violence and physical violence is ordered day. It's easy for prison gangs to go into these places and assume complete control. Some of the state prisons are not much better. I'm not going to preach that Joliet or Angola is somehow better than private prisons. But in private prisons, all the abuses that go on in the prison system is far more pronounced.
What do you think is worse, the old days when you were in there in the 60s or today with the private prisons?
The old days, because you knew where you stood. All you had to do in the old days was to establish a way to survive. And if you could establish a way to survive, whether you did it intellectually or whether you just become a real badass, you were able to, that's all you had to deal with is your survival. In today's prisons, in particular in the private prisons, there is so much corruption, so much abuse, and this is all systemic throughout the system that it's much worse than it is dated. The level of tension that exists and racism that exists between the inmates is mind-boggling. The unholy alliances between the free people and the inmates is unbelievable. So it's a lot worse at least in the old days, you knew a guard was a guard and the inmate was inmate. That's not the way it is anymore.
Now, in your experience, too, like when you hear on TV contraband getting into the prisons, it's always like, oh, the inmates, their friends are sneaking it in through their asses, usually, is the big theory. Now, you being in prison, How did you find most of the contraband making their way into the prisons?
Well, initially, that's the way it used to come. It used to come through what they call stalls. And, for example, drugs. You took drugs and you cut off the finger of a rubber glove, and your female visitor would bring it into you. She would either smuggle it in through her private genitalia parts and would give it to an inmate in the visiting room, and he would just simply take it and with a very little application of petroleum, inserted up his rectum. Then when he went back to the yard, he just simply expelled it. The same if he swallowed $100. If he swallowed $5 $20 bills, he would swallow it right before his visit was up. Would go back to the dormitory, drink some shaving cream and throw it up into the sink. So those were the very limited and controlled ways that inmates got contraband. But as time passed and as the prison system became more corrupt, then, you started the primary source of getting contraband in became prison guards. They became the vehicle for trafficking contraband in the prison system.
Have you ever seen any of these wholesale suppliers, people who supply goods and services to the prison, being involved in these smuggling operations, bringing stuff in?
You're talking about the guards, or who are you talking about?
Companies who provide goods and services to the prison, being involved in these smuggling chains.
They don't have direct contact with the inmates, not the owners or the officials of these companies, the people, but there are situations where they're delivery guys, and some of these guys may get jobs with these companies for the very specific reason that they know they're going to have access to the prison compound, and somebody that they're affiliated with on the outside is assigned to a job, let's say the inmate canteen,
right,
that's going to unload. It's going to be an inmate that's going to unload the supplies off the truck. And so it's very easy for a truck driver to stash stuff in the boxes and in the containers that are going to be delivered. And it's very easy for the inmate who's going to unload it or have someone unload it to access the contraband and then distribute it in the prison.
And exactly, too. And a lot of these prisons are like in prison towns. Like it's the only business there in that town. Anybody who lives there is pretty much working for the prison. So everybody gets to know each other and how things are done. As a matter of fact, they just had in Elmira Dannemora, where they just had that big escape. Those guys get out through the tunnel in upstate New York. And they had a live...
Yeah, New York.
Yeah, right. They had a live video interview with one of the guys out in front of the prison, one of the guards or something, I think. And you see a guy walking up to the wall. They lower a rope down to the wall. He attaches something to the rope, and they pull it up right behind him.
Yeah. Well, you know, when females started working, I got to admit that I was opposed to this, and I fought this up. I filed a lawsuit to try to keep female guards out of prison. I had no problem with females working in the prison system, working in the guard towers or working at the security checkpoints, but I vigorously opposed females working in the belly of the prison, where, you know, the dormitories, where they would come in daily contact with the inmates, because that was so easy for, just like in the New York case, for inmates to emotionally take advantage of female guards or get them involved in compromising situations where they're forced to then do what the inmates want them to do.
Gotcha. Now, how did this come about? How did you first hear about this whole thing going on with the pardons for sale? How did you hear about it first?
Well, I used to work before I went to work for the Hanging Light. I worked as a clerk in a prison culinary department, and the guy I worked for run the kitchen. The free man I worked for run the kitchen. So he and I had a relationship. So when I became editor of the Hanging Light, you know, he and our paths used to cross, and we'd speak and we'd talk. Well, his new clerk, was a guy that I knew, another inmate that I knew. And so, you know, I'd been hearing rumors once Edwards came back into power in 1984. There became these rumors, and it became evident that something was going on, and I had my suspicions, and I knew that things were not right. So this inmate one day came to talk to me, and he was mad because he had paid $5,000 for a pardon, and the pardon board chairman was demanding $2,500 more in jewelry. And because I was a lawyer, he came to me, asked me legal advice about whether or not he had to pay him another $2,500.
Oh,
this is how open this was. And so, you know, after I told him, I said, well, you have to give me more to work with than that. So then he spilled out the whole scheme, you know, and laid it all out for me. And, you know, so with that, you know, I had all the information. So then he took me to the guy that I worked for, the prison personnel that I worked for, the prison guard that I worked for. And they all both explained it to me and told me they could work a deal for me. You know, if I wanted to do the deal for $20,000, and you know, that's where it was. And I knew at that time I had a choice to make. I knew one thing: they had brought me into a conspiracy that if I went through with it, then I was guilty. I was as dirty as they were. If I chose to reject it, then I'm placing myself in a liable situation and a risky situation, because then they don't know, well, he knows too much. And at what point in time do they say, hey, we got to deal with this? Or, you report it. You know, so, you know, my wife and I chose to report it.
Yeah, but didn't you think, boy, I should come up with the $20K and get out of here? Because even if you report it, you're not guaranteed to get out even if you report it.
It became an issue to me at that time, and maybe, you know, when my wife and I look back over it, and eventually when I made parole, the irony is when I made parole, the person, the lawyer I hired, who happened to be a state senator and a very powerful African-American state senator in Louisiana, I paid him $25,000 to represent before the parole board, and I made parole. Now, it was all perfectly legitimate, but at the end of the day, when I got out, it cost $25,000 in 2006, you know, for the legal representation I got. And that's not to mention all the other lawyers that my wife and I had went through trying to get, you know, get my time cut to get a parole and what have you. So, you know, we probably spent $50,000-$60,000 over a period of 15 years on different attorneys, you know. So in '86, when there was this chance to do it for $20,000, I was actually at that point outraged that here I had spent all this time trying to turn my life around, trying to prove that I was rehabilitated, and it all came down to me. I would get out if I paid the money, and I just said no. My wife and I both said no. She was a television journalist at that time. There was her reputation. There was her standing at stake. There was my reputation, my standing at stake, my very rehabilitation at stake, and this was a tempting offer. You know, this was an opportunity. Hey, give us the money, and you can go home. But you know, we'd have been criminals. You know, that's the whole bottom line. If we had bought into it, we'd have been criminals.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, as a young man, you know, spending 7 years on death row, you know, where you're locked up 24 hours a day, your self-respect and your morals, things are you know, are way more intense for someone that's gone through that. You know, what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong, and you can't do it because you got to live with yourself. Is probably like off the charts compared to like a guy who's just been hustling his way through life and trying to get past go every couple of weeks.
Prison is not a place for middle ground.
Yeah.
You either or are. You know, if you're going to, for example, if you're going to be a gang member, then you're committed to the code of that gang. You're committed to their rules and their way of doing business. And if you don't embrace that, it's like, you know, blood in, blood out. So you got to accept being what they are, and you have to become what they are. You know, the same way if you become an honest, decent, law-abiding, if you want to use that term, inmate, then when the time comes to pay your dues to be a honest, law-abiding person, then you have to step up to the plate and do that, you know. And that's what we were faced with. It boiled down really to that. Now, don't get me wrong, from that point in time, we spent another almost 25 years in prison because of that decision. And there were a lot of times when, you know, we went through some very difficult times, my wife and I. And there were times when we even questioned our own decision. But at the bottom line, when we went to bed every night, we knew that we had did the right thing. And to this day, I know that I did the right thing, and I do not regret it to this day.
Let me ask you this, because we're coming up to the end of the hour here. I know we agreed for 1 hour, but can you give me another hour so we can cover all the West Memphis 3 stuff as well, or do you want to schedule for the future?
Yeah, I guess we could go ahead if that's what you want to do. I guess we can go ahead and do that.
Thank you very much. Now, how did you work this out? How did you go undercover? How did you contact the FBI? What's the process now? You decide you're going to turn them in.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, we made a decision. My wife called her cousin. He was a congressman, United States congressman in Washington. At that time, he was head of the House Ways and Means Committee, a very prominent Republican congressman. And she told him what had happened. So he put her in touch with he contacted the FBI, and he set up a meeting between her and the FBI. And she had a number of meetings with the FBI. And so she met with the prison official who was brokering the pardon deal. She had to wear a body wire in that meeting that the FBI had under surveillance. And so, you know, all that conversation took place, and the FBI had their information. But the FBI at that time operated on a very stupid premise. The brief conversation I had I told my wife with the FBI is that they busted the free man, the gentleman in prison. If they arrested him, that he would roll over and give them the pardon board chairman, right, who would then roll over and give them people above him. But they wanted the governor. They were hell-bent on getting the governor. So as this thing was going on, and I was there in the prison, and word started circulating that the feds were investigating, and they knew that there was somebody on the inside cooperating. They didn't know who it was, And I didn't realize at that time that the Dixie Mafia, which was in control of the Anglo inmate subculture, had about $400,000 in the pardon process. And, so they knew that something was about to happen. And so they were trying to track down and identify whoever the inside person was. And this whole inside person thing became known to everybody. It was involved in the scheme when an FBI agent who got drunk and was out with a state police investigator who was his friend, and he revealed enough to that state police investigator that the feds had someone on the inside. And so the state police investigator then went straight to the governor and told him, look here, they're after you. And, they're fixing to do this deal. So Edwards and his machine made a decision to set the pardon board chairman up in a state sting, which they did, got him on camera taking money, taking $25,000 in a bag, and they arrested him. The state authorities arrested him, which then put the feds in a position where their whole investigation, as far as they were concerned, was blown because they waited too late. So once the state investigation took place, then some kind of way it was leaked, and I never know who leaked the information, but the information was leaked on the inside that I was the informant, and a contract was put out on me. And the way I escaped that was at the U.S. Marshals. Once I, through my own senses and my own prison instincts and skills, I knew something was coming down. I knew that I was being watched, and I knew that a setup was about to take place, and I knew that I was fixing to be killed. And once I let the U.S. attorney know that, he immediately sent the U.S. Marshals in to take me out of prison in protective custody.
When you first approached the FBI, did you have a deal in place where, okay, fine, if I help you with this case, you're going to somehow do something for me?
No.
Or? No.
And as it turned out, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the only deal, it wasn't even a deal, the only thing they ever said was in a letter to the pardon board, because the pardon board, when I later went up and got my time cut, the only thing that the U.S. Attorney did was to say that I cooperated with the investigation. So they did not go out of their way to assist me. As it turned out, a state prosecutor who was with the same district attorney's office trying to keep me in prison, he provided more substantial information to the pardon board that ultimately resulted in helping me get my life sentence reduced to 90 years. It was reduced to 90 years by Governor Opperman, but because I had served enough time, I was immediately eligible for parole. The political opposition became really intense against my parole, and it took me seven parole hearings before I was granted parole.
Well, a couple of questions. Okay, first of all, now you said that the U.S. Marshals came in, they put you in protective custody. Now, what was that like? Now, that's pretty much almost like going back to death row again. Now you're in your cell 20 hours a day?
Well, no. They transferred me to a place that was a minimum security facility in Baton Rouge that was known as a state police barracks, and they had transferred a number of other inmates who had also, once the scam was exposed and once indictments were handed down, they transferred a number of these inmates who had cooperated and give up other people. They transferred them to the barracks. I remained there at the barracks through Governor Opperman's administration, and then when Evan Edwards was reelected governor, they immediately moved and to send me back into the prison system, which they did. And they were going to send me back to Angola when a number of people who were supporting my release, very prominent people, including the New Orleans Metropolitan Crime Commission, a number of these people, in effect, conveyed to the governor that if you do that, you're signing his death warrant. and they knew what that was going to look like there. But Edwards wanted to put me in a position where I would be killed, and because I exposed that whole pardons thing when he was governor before, and when he returned, he came back with a vengeance. He wanted revenge for those people who had embarrassed his previous administration. And so, I managed, they finally put me in what's called a little protection unit at a facility in North Louisiana, where they kept me for the next 9 years, which most of that time I was trying to get out and get back in prison population, because I didn't want to live in that protection unit. I wanted to be back in general population. I was willing to take my chances back in general population and, to get out of the protection unit.
Okay. Let's take a break here now. Let's take a commercial break. It's going to be another 5-minute break. And we're here with Billy Wayne Sinclair. This is a really incredible story. One of his books is A Life in the Balance, the Billy Wayne Sinclair story. And the other one is Crime, Courage, Redemption, The Journey of Billy and Jodie Sinclair. Now, yeah. You okay?
Yeah, let me correct you 1 minute. Can
Okay.
I do that right now?
Yeah, sure.
The book that you're referring to, the second book, Jody and I have an article in that book. That's a collection of essays that was put together by a gentleman named Paul Loeb. And one of my essays appeared in that along with Martin Luther King and a number of other prominent people who Mr. Loeb felt had made significant changes in not only their personal situation, but in the lives of other people. So the title you give is a book that was by Paul Loeb. But I have an essay in that book.
Okay, very cool. Next to Martin Luther King.
I wanted to clarify that.
You can't complain about that. Next to Martin Luther King. And the website is johntfloyd.com. If you need an attorney down there in Texas, I would recommend you get a hold of John T. Floyd, because I think Billy Wayne Sinclair is a very effective guy to get things done.
The other book that my wife and I published, which was published after I was released from prison, is Capital Punishment and Indictment by a Death Row Survivor. So those are the two books that we had published, Life in the Balance and Capital Punishment.
Capital Punishment is the other one. Okay, great. I'll look that up. I'll make it taking a commercial so I'll be able to quote it correctly as we go further. And like I said, all these books will be available in the Opperman Report bookstore. We'll be right back with more of Billy Wayne Sinclair, incredible life story, after these messages. This is your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. And if you're enjoying this show right now, there's more. You can get more. You can go to the Ed Opperman YouTube channel, and you could subscribe there. And we have archives of all of our past shows for over the past 3 years, about 200, 300 shows. You can also go to the Opperman Report Spreaker channel, and you could follow us there. Again, a ton of shows, about 300 shows on there. And whenever we do an impromptu show, an emergency type broadcast that we do during the week occasionally, you'll get an email notifying you of breaking news and spontaneous broadcasts that we may do during the week. You can also go to oppermanreport.com and become a member. If you become a member, you help support the free archives on Spreaker and YouTube, and you help support the free shows on Friday evening and on Saturday evening. Each of these shows, Friday evening and Saturday evening, are carried for free on 7 internet stations, okay? So you help support that, but also, too, at OppermanReport.com in the members section, we have exclusive content. Shows that are recorded during the week that are only available to members. So please check out OppermanReport.com and help support the show.
The son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement, Bernie Sanders. He went to public schools, then college, where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. Bernie moved to Vermont, won election and praise as one of America's best mayors. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families and for principle, opposing the Iraq War, supporting veterans. Now he's taking on Wall Street and a corrupt political system that holds up a rigged economy. Bernie's campaign is funded by over 1 million small contributions from people like you. He's fighting for living wages, equal pay, and tuition-free public colleges. Bernie Sanders.
People are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Bernie Sanders. Husband, father, grandfather. An honest leader. Building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Check out strawmanmusic.com. Sean Duff is our webmaster here at the Opperman Report, and he's a very talented musician. He's part of a band called Strawman. They're based up there in Canada. Don't hold that against them. These are like-minded folks. If you like the shows you hear on the Opperman Report, you'll like the music that they have over at strawmanmusic.com.
Enough is enough. Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And then, after getting a huge taxpayer bailout because they were too big to fail, it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. That's crazy. I'm Bernie Sanders. My plan: break up the big banks who are strangling our economy and make them pay their fair share of taxes. Then we can invest in the middle class, expand Social Security, and provide universal college education. I'll rein in Wall Street behavior so they can't crash our economy again. Will they like me? No. Will they begin to play by the rules if I'm president? You better believe it. I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
You know, you can get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Now, this is a limited edition book, okay? And you can get a signed copy of this book, and it'll be personally autographed to you or whoever you want to give the book to as a gift. Once you have my signature on that book, you can copy the signature and put it on checks and pass them all over the world. Emailrevealer.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator.
He's fought injustice and inequality his whole life. Bernie Sanders. As a college student, he was arrested for challenging segregated housing. Bernie marched with Dr. King and thousands of others for civil rights. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families on health care and jobs. Now he's taking on Wall Street banks and a corrupt political system that keeps in place a rigged economy. Bernie Sanders, a reformer who believes in ending racial profiling and mass incarceration so the justice system works for everyone. Bernie Sanders.
There is no president who will fight harder to end institutional racism and reform our broken criminal justice system.
Bernie Sanders, an honest leader building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Show's brought to you by emailrevealer.com. We're here today with Billy Wayne Sinclair. One book is A Life in the Balance, the Billy Wayne Sinclair story, and the other one is Capital Punishment and Indictment by a Death Row Survivor. Also, too, you can get a hold of them there at johntfloyd.com. If you need an attorney in Texas, get you out of trouble. And Billy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, now, I got a question for you. Now, here you are. You just did this whole sting on the parole board, and now you have to go before the parole board in order to get out. What was that like?
Well, actually, in Louisiana, the pardon and parole board are two distinct boards.
Okay.
So, but each time a governor takes office, they appoint their own members to the board. So I got a pardon under a commutation under Buddy Romer's pardon board. That's who reduced my sentence from life to 90 years. And he was a reform-minded governor. So he had an honest, decent, honorable pardon board. So when I came up, the merits of my argument for a commutation, my record of rehabilitation, and a number of other things, a host of other factors that they considered. They said, all right, this man's been locked up this number of years. At that time, I'd been locked up, 25 years. So they said, let's commute his sentence. And they did. And while it made me immediately eligible for parole, that was no guarantee that I would make parole.
Right.
So, and I was denied parole through a number of times through other governors. And finally in 2004, Kathleen Blanco became governor. And she was a very honest and reform-minded governor. She appointed a very professional, reform-minded parole board. So when I went up before them in 2006, I made parole. Now, sitting on that parole board was a victim rights advocate whose own son had been killed during a robbery, and the chairman of the board that was a former police chief in a little town in South Louisiana. So I was going up before a very conservative board, and all three of them voted for my release. Now, of course, that parole at that time, I had been supported a number of years, and my parole was supported by the New Orleans Metropolitan Crime Commission, which is a very, very conservative, very, very prominent body of some of New Orleans' leading businessmen. And I'm the only inmate that in their history that they had ever advocated for his release. And so because of that kind of support, I was able to convince the parole board to release me.
Now, from the time you got the parole board gave you the okay, how much time elapsed between you get the okay from the parole board that you finally walk out the prison?
Let me tell you something. Ed, they wanted me out of that system so bad. Normally it takes about 6 weeks from the time you're granted parole to your actual release. I went up on a Friday. I was granted parole that Friday. They called me in secret, took my fingerprints, photographed me, and told me not to say a word over my mouth, that I would be released Monday. That Monday I was suddenly turned all my stuff in. You had to turn all your clothing, everything, all your belongings that belonged to the state in, And so I had to notify my wife, who was working in Houston at the time, to drive, because the facility I was in was right across the Louisiana border near Lake Charles. And so it was about a 2-hour drive, so she had to drive over to pick me up. But what's interesting is that when they called me in to have me sign all my release papers, they told me that I had to leave, and I told them, I said, well, I have nobody to pick me up. And they said, well, you can't stay here. You've been released. Yeah, well, it's 40 years of fighting to get out. And I'm having to tell them, hold it, I can't leave. And there was a television crew waiting outside to film, who had learned about that I was being released, and they wanted to film my release, so they were waiting outside with their cameras. So ultimately, later on in the day, when Jodi arrived and we got in the car, we drove out, and that's the way it went. It was sort of anticlimactic. They call you in this room, I signed the papers, and suddenly I'm told to vacate the premises.
What's the first thing you did when you got out?
My wife and I drove to Houston, Texas. What was ironic was there was a code of behavior in prison that if you get out, you leave all your good stuff, your personal clothes, to whoever, your friends or whatever have you. And you wear out the oldest clothes you can wear out, So that's what I had on when I walked out. So, it wasn't like I'm dressed to where I could go into some place and eat. So my wife and I drove. She drove me. She was in the car. She drove me to Houston. And she had she had a downtown condo, which was on the 16th floor in Houston. So, we drive across the border. I'm scared to death. I keep looking in the mirror. I keep thinking, it's going to be a mistake. They're going to come get me. I'm going to see a red light flashing in the mirror, and so my wife was trying to make sure that I'd stay calm, that everything was okay. Well, once we got across the Texas line, I knew, well, heck, if they stop me now, we got to go through extradition proceedings. So at least I'm I'm safe from Louisiana at this point. So then when we got home, when we drove in, I saw that Houston skyline, and we coming in on a freeway. My God, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. I mean, it was just so massive and huge, and lights everywhere, and gigantic, skyscrapers and all this. And I had no frame of reference for anything like this, Ed. I didn't know what was really going on. And so when my wife pulled into the underground driveway to go park, I asked her, where are we going? What is this? So she had to tell me, this is where we park. So we park, get out, and go upstairs. And when I walk in and I see this gorgeous home, this gorgeous condo that she's prepared for us, I mean, I just sat on the couch and I cried. I cried like a baby.
I could imagine.
So she fixed a quick dinner for us, and I went and took a shower, and broke the towel rack inside the shower. The first time I got in the shower, she heard this crash and come in there, and I had broken the towel rack. But we sat and we had a quiet dinner, and we could look out the window from the 16th floor, and I could see the whole Houston skyline, all downtown Houston, the Toyota Center where the Houston Rockets play, everything.
And what was that first meal? Do you remember? What did she cook?
Huh?
Do you remember what she cooked?
It was some kind of rice and meat mixture, like a dirty rice with some hamburger meat and stuff in it. Okay. It was great, And then we went in and sat went into the bedroom. I sat down on the bed and I laid my head back down, and that's the last thing I remember till the next morning.
Oh, boy.
I was just totally dead to the world. I was just so exhausted from that day that I just, people think, well, it's but it's a scary thing. I once said, Ed, that if I got out of prison, they could put me in the middle of New York in my underwear, and I would survive. I truly and honestly believe that. But let me tell you one thing. When they put me out in Houston, Texas, and I had a network of support. I had a wife. I had a home. I had a family. My wife's family was there in Houston. But even that, it is a scary, scary thing to suddenly realize everything is moving so fast. And the next morning, my wife had to go to work, and I'm standing there looking at this downtown skyline, and I'm wondering, how in the hell am I going to survive out here? How am I going to deal with it? I look down and see all these people like little ants going to work, and everybody doing all it, and I'm wondering, at least in prison I was safe. Here, I felt so exposed. I felt so, my God, you got to buck up here. You got to really, being a jailhouse lawyer out here don't mean anything, So immediately I knew I was going to have to go back. I was going to have to go to school. I was going to have to roll in college. I was going to take college courses, night and day courses, and I was going to have to get my education. And so, I did that. And I spent the summer. I didn't know how to turn a computer on. I spent the summer. I got out in April. I spent the summer because I enrolled in college for September. That summer, I spent the summer just learning how to master a computer. I had to go to community college for that. I had to, take courses on legal investigation. And in the first semester of the college, I carried 18 hours. And then the second semester, the spring semester, I carried 21 hours. And I was able to get all the hours I needed to get me a paralegal degree, which I did, and I made the dean's list. So over the first 10 months, actually about the first eight and a half, 9 months that I was in school and doing this, I wasn't working. We were living off my wife's salary, and the parole people told me that was okay, that as long as I was in school, I didn't have to have a job. But I knew, in early 2007, I said, I have to get a job. I mean, I have to find a thing. So I started sending packets of materials out to different attorneys in Houston and got some real nice replies, but no takers, And I'd sent all the material about my background and all that. So one day I happened to be reading something, I don't know what publication it was in, about this attorney, and on his website, you know, he had the different kind of crimes that he represented, and one category of crimes is terrorism. So I said, hell, if a man represented terrorists, then he might hire me, you know. So I sent the guy a pack of material, and then I received this email back from him saying that he felt that I had some skills that would be useful to him, and he'd like to meet me and talk with me. And so we met, we talked, and he said, let's do this. He said, let me put you on a part-time basis for 90 days, and we'll see how we gel together, how we work together. And then he said, then we'll decide about full-time employment. Well, within 3 weeks, he told me, he said, I want you to be with me full-time. And so, you know, that's where we are. We've been together since. And like he's told me, he said, you know, because I told him, I said, you know, John, what should happen if something should happen to you? He said, well, he said, know this. He said, as long as I'm alive and as long as I got a law firm, he said, you'll be the last man standing. Me and you will be the only two out the door. So, you know, that made me feel great that I have the loyalty of this man who is, been at my side for.
Right. Let me ask you this: how old were you when you walked out of prison?
61.
61, and you start college at 61 years old. Amazing. Now,
went in at 20.
Came out at 61. Yeah. Now, did you have to visit your parole officer weekly, monthly? What was that like?
Yeah, I had to go every month to visit my parole officer, you know, and check in, and you know, there was all the UA's urine analysis, you know, to make sure you're not on drugs or anything, you know. So I had to do all that, but I worked my way through that, and now, you know, I only have to report 3 times a year, you know, because I'm on what they call minimum status. So I only have to go in and see my parole officer once every 4 months.
But 10 years later, you still got to see a parole officer 3 times a year.
Oh, yeah, I will. You know, I get off parole in 2055.
Oh, brother. Okay. Well, God bless you, man. Let's hope you make it. We'll invite him to the birthday party, right? Yeah.
That would be an achievement.
Yeah. Well, God bless you, man. I hope you do. I really, you know, what a story, man. What a story. God bless you. Now, one of the things now you've been writing about, it's caused you probably more grief than a lot of other things you've been through in your life, is this case of the West Memphis 3. How did you get started on that?
Well, you know, when my wife and I published the book, Capital Punishment, we decided that we'd create a website. So this guy that worked with her, she was working for an attorney in Houston herself. She was his public affairs director. So, you know, she handled all his community relations. So Hugo was worked at the firm, and he was just like you. He was kind of absorbed by the story, and so when we published his book, he wanted to build us a website. So he did. He created a website, capitalpunishmentbook.com. And so I would write on a weekly basis, sometimes twice a week. I would post up pieces dealing with whatever the current issues were surrounding the death penalty. And occasionally I would step out that field and write about some criminal justice issue that was a topic of discussion, either locally or either statewide or at a national level. And so I did that. Well, in 2010, they aired, 48 Hours aired this piece about Damon Echols. And I watched the piece, and my wife and I sat there and watched it. I had absolutely no idea about the West Memphis 3, didn't know who they were, anything about them, the case, anything. And so my wife asked me, because, you know, over a period of time, you know, she would ask me things about criminal justice matters and what I think, and I would tell her whatever my gut instincts were. So when she asked me what did I think about Echols after having watched the 48 Hours piece, I said, he's lying. And she said, well, why you feel that way? And I told her, you know, it's just a gut feeling. I was watching it and watching his mannerisms, the way he responded to Aaron Moriarty's questions, and and the way he tried to present himself. But even at that, when I decided to write a piece about the case, I did not take any position on their guilt or innocence. I just wrote about the legal basis that I felt that he and Jason Baldwin should get a new trial. And that was pretty much my interest. So I posted up 2 or 3 pieces. Well, I started getting a lot of traffic, comments coming in on a website about the West Memphis 3 case, and I realized, hey, these supporters of the West Memphis 3 are fanatical. So I started reading more, going to different websites and whatever have you, and I started reading about the case, about Miss Kelly and about Baldwin and about their confessions and about the different factors in the case. And I just drew the conclusion that they were guilty. And so, I started writing about that.
Well, before we get to that, Billy, before we get to that, what was your theory that on the basis of why that Eccles and Baldwin should get a new trial?
I think it was a rage killing that happened spontaneously, and the way I think it happened, this is my theory.
Okay.
I think that they knew these boys, and that these boys were out there playing. They were riding their bikes around. They were playing, and they came across these 3 teenagers, and all of them are pretty sick puppies, particularly Eccles and Baldwin.
Sure.
I mean, they're not operating with a full deck here, and Eccles had some serious psychological problems. And those boys came up, and probably some exchanges were had, and those boys probably give them a finger or disrespect them, or they felt disrespected one way. And Eccles, I believe, instructed to grab them. And I think from that point on, the violence escalated, and they started doing some terrible things to these boys. And then they threw 2 of them in that creek, that creek bed alive, and they drowned. And it was a horrible thing. And I started thinking about it. I said, hold it. This is not the work of a serial killer. What would be the chances of a serial killer being at Devil's Knot on this particular day, at this particular time, when these 3 boys were riding their bicycles, and on a spur-of-the-moment thing would decide to kill them? And, the first theory that was offered by the West Memphis 3 supporters was Mr. Bojangles. That was this black man who showed up at a nearby restaurant and used the bathroom. His clothes had mud and blood on his clothes and everything else. But we never heard anything else about Mr. Bojangles. And so I realized that whoever did that crime was local. And, no other crime like that happened in West Memphis. You didn't have any more of these kind of crimes. So this was a spontaneous act that occurred at one specific moment in time, in which all the parties came together accidentally, and what happened was not intended to happen, but it happened, and it happened because you were dealing with some sick young men, and it got carried away, it got out of hand, and they killed those boys, and I will always believe that. They tried first to shift the blame to John Byers, one of the other boys' father. When that that theory fell through, then they went after Terry Hobbs and tried to pin it on him and David Jacoby, a friend of his who occasionally played the guitar with him, and, it was just, to me, no other logical reason. And then if you look at every one of these kids at the time, Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly, they all in one form or another admitted to this killing, in different contexts and in different situations. But every one of them indicated to a third party that they had some knowledge or some participation in the crime.
But my question, though, was when you first came into contact with the case, you said that you felt that they could get a new trial. What would you, if you were going to file that motion, what would you base that on? What theory?
The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and a number of other Court of Appeals has ruled that you cannot use the confession of a co-defendant without having an opportunity to cross-examine it. So Miss Kelly gave confessions, and Baldwin and Eccles were tried together. And so, they introduced Miss Kelly's confessions at their trial, and Miss Kelly did not take the stand. So they never had an opportunity to cross-examine. That was the sole basis for my reason for saying they were entitled to a new trial.
Yeah, and that seems like it's open and shut.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. A number of federal circuit courts had ruled that way and had reversed a number of convictions because the Sixth Amendment right of confrontation allows you to confront and cross-examine anybody who gives testimony against you.
And so their attorneys never pursued that theory?
I don't think the attorneys were aggressively pursuing it. I think they were locked into a political effort to, convince the public that they were representing 3 innocent kids, and they were going with the theory that, they would gather evidence. And later when the so-called DNA evidence, the hair transfers came up, that became the focus of their effort to get them out. I don't know if that particular question, it was not in the Arkansas Supreme Court decision that I read upholding their conviction. So I don't know if it was ever read, and I don't know if the attorneys felt like, well, we can't raise this because it was not objected to, so we're procedurally barred from raising it. Only thing we can raise is whether or not they're guilty or whether or not they're innocent,
Okay, gotcha. Now, when you initially started writing about this, the reception from these the West Memphis 3, they're called the supporters, right? But it's more like a fan club, like you said. They're extremely obsessed.
They're fanatic.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question.
And then I started getting...
Have you ever run across anything like that in your life before, like a group of such fanatical people in your life?
No, it was mind-boggling. It was mind-boggling how this young psychopath could say anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never encountered this where this young psychopath could say anything, and people would automatically embrace it and believe it. It's like the whole story that he was raped while on death row by prison guards. I don't even know how anybody can possibly believe that, because death row is one of the most secure environments in any prison, even in Arkansas, which is probably 30 years behind time, but they have security. When you go to a visit, you've got to be searched when you come back. One guard does not do the search, so the only opportunity a guard would have to have raped him would have been in the prison shakedown room, or to try to have sex with him through the bars. And I mean, that's a very limited circumstance. There's only so many things you can do between prison bars, and I don't know how I don't even know how anybody could remotely believe that. It's like, the reason he had to wear the heavy shades is that, all those years on death row, the sunlight and all. I don't care what this guy said. The first thing he said when he got out is he was on his iPhone. He was messing around with it, and he was doing a search on the judge's name, their judge, and he come up with a porn site. Well, I'm not an iPhone user, but I know one thing. You're not going to be doing some kind of search and come up with a porn site. But he felt that was cute, that, he could say that, and that people would be gullible enough to believe it. And they were. They were gullible enough to believe everything that he said. And, what got me is that if you looked at him, if you watched him in his interviews, and not only to track his way of presenting things, the logic that he used, but if you watched his mannerisms and his body language and the way he sort of articulated the facts of his case, it was evident that, to me, at least to me it was, that he was not being forthcoming,
And you're someone who, after 40 years in prison, you've met a guy or two that's been in there that said they were innocent, right? You met a couple of guys who wanted to help you with their case?
The old saying is that you can fool the fans, but not the players, right. And I've seen a number of people, not as skilled as Echoes, but I've certainly seen a number of people who talk about innocence, and saying that they're innocent. But Echo's whole thing was never to present evidence of his innocence, but to present weaknesses in the state's case and the state's evidence. They never came forward with any evidence that would support the conclusion, reasonable conclusion that they did not do this. They came up with two hairs. They often came up with two hairs, two strains of hair. And when the DNA was done on those strains of hair, they said that the two hairs, which one was found on a nearby tree and one was found on a ligature, that these two hairs were consistent with the kind of hairs that Jacoby and Terry Hobbs has. But Terry Hobbs lived with this boy, and I forget the Branch, Stevie Branch. He lived with him. He was his stepfather. So there's any way that Stevie Branch could have picked up Terry Hobbs' hair, from the same house. It's called transference, DNA transference, and I believe that's what happened. And of course, Jacoby was frequently around the Hobbs household because those guys played the guitar together, and they were semi-musicians. Now, Terry Hobbs, in a related opinion, was a piece of crap. I mean, I had nothing for this guy, given what I read about him in the public, his background and everything else. He was a woman beater, and he was a pretty much alcoholic. But he ain't killed those three boys.
Yeah, and by the way, we should make clear this ligature you mentioned was actually one of the kids' shoelaces. So it's it's not a stretch that a hair gets on your kid's shoelace. And another thing too, I wanted to point out is the story about the Mr. Eccles' prison rape. I don't believe it was a guard. I believe it was the prisoner in the next cell. Somehow they managed a way that they created an opening that he could make it, and Eccles had to get into the other guy's cell. The other guy wouldn't fit into his cell.
Well, see, that was from what I read, yeah. And I read the Arkansas Times, Sun Times story about the rape. The thing with the other inmate, which was an African American inmate that was adjacent to a cell, he supposedly cut out a place. It's a cinder block wall. Right. And somehow he managed to remove enough cinder blocks where he could get over to the next cell and allow the guy to rape him. But the prison guard, and according to the Arkansas Sun Times, he was raped by a prison guard.
Oh, it's a different incident.
Following a visit.
I wasn't aware that was a different incident. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and I went back. Ultimately, the article was taken down off one website, but I managed to read. In fact, the reporter who wrote the article contacted me and about the case because I had sent him an email asking if I could use his story, and he gave me permission to use portions of his story, and I did. And it was in that story there about the guard raping him. There was the other stories about guards being abusive to him, mishandling and prison brutality. But there was that one episode where he said he was raped by a prison guard.
Now, so your first article was it negative toward the West Memphis Three, or was it kind of in part the first article when you wrote?
No, it was more critical of 48 Hours. The first article was more critical of 48 Hours because they did not interview Baldwin. They did not interview Miss Kelly, and both of them were in custody at the time. They simply focused on Eccles, and the interviewer never really asked him any hard questions. There was a lot of fluff and puff questions that she asked him, giving him every opportunity to spin the case from his own perspective. So I didn't go after them. I just criticized the format of the 48 Hours interview. But as I said, I started writing about the case, and as I read more and as I became more familiar with the facts of the case, I came to the conclusion that they were in fact guilty.
Okay, so now once you started coming to that conclusion and writing about that, What kind of reaction did you get from the? Because I got to tell you, I've had so many people on this show. People like Pat Brown, the criminal profiler, Diane Diamond, all these different people. And whenever you bring up the West Memphis 3 case, the issue of the fanatical supporters, no people don't like to talk about it anymore because it's just so overwhelming. But what kind of experience did you have?
Well, I had people writing me. Some knew about my history, my criminal history. So it's like I was a traitor. I done betrayed a fellow killer.
Right.
Well, I didn't put myself in a category with Damien Echols, and that wasn't my role. My role was to look at the facts, and I repeatedly stated that I'm going not by firsthand knowledge, not by any depth investigation. By no means is this a journalistic investigation. This is my perceptions based upon the public record. And, I'd get these horrible comments, calling me everything in the world. And, I mean, the trail of comments, it would create one person commenting with another person coming back cursing him out, with another person coming back cursing him out, So we keep this whole chain of comments going every time I posted an article. And I had a couple anti-West Memphis 3 because I wrote one long article. And in that one long article, I said, my response to the West Memphis 3 supporters. That was the title of that particular post. And in there, I analyzed every single thing, beginning with the crime, down through the interrogations, to the investigation, the trials, the confessions, the aftermath. I laid it all out as I saw it. And, of course, a couple of other websites picked it up, and they carried it, and they posted it on their websites. Someone posted up as the definitive analysis of guilt of the West Memphis 3. Now, I did not put it up there for that particular purpose. It did not cross my mind. What I put it up there for is I was getting tired of being bombarded by all these comments of these people who wanted to put a ligature around me.
Right. In your experience, and you're a jailhouse lawyer, like you said, right? What is your experience with the inmates making false jailhouse confessions? Have you ever run across that, where inmates just claim that they were? Okay, go ahead.
And I've written about it. I've written about it on the website with John, the attorney I work for. It's something we dealt with. By and large, most jailhouse informants are not reliable. Now, what you have to look at, because a lot of times in these cases, either the police or prosecutors feed them information and hold out an offer of some special benefit if they will say or provide that the defendant confess to them. But you have to understand that there are some situations, and when you look at Echols and Baldwin and Miss Kelly's personalities, when you look at all of them taken in totality, there are inmates who cannot keep their mouth shut. In prison, they want to brag about, or they want to mention, or they want to allude to the fact that they did this or they did that, and they do that as a way of showing whoever they're talking to that I'm smarter than the cops, and I'm smarter than the system, that I did this and got away with it, and blah, 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 blah,
Gotcha. So you're not naive at all to this idea of prisoners making confessions and stuff. Now, what do you make of this idea of the false confession of Miss Kelly when he was first went to the police? He wanted a reward, and then he confessed to the police, and they're claiming that he was manipulated because he had a low IQ.
Again, I wrote about that. Even if you say he had IQ, or what they claim, 72, borderline 72, that does not mean that you do not know right from wrong. It does not mean that you cannot sit there and provide the authorities with a detailed account of what happened. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Miss Kelly, when he was confessing, and I forget exactly how many he gave, I think over a period of time it's something like 6 different confessions. But
up until the time we started this interview today, we don't know how many of he's given since we've started, since you and I have met. Okay.
I think somewhere I read somewhere one time that sticks in my head. It's 6 confessions.
Yeah.
But these serial confessions that he give did have information that only one of the people was involved in that. So you would have to. Why did the police suspect Miss Kelly? They had not started an investigation against Miss Kelly. Their investigation started with not even investigation. When that probation officer reportedly arrived at the scene, and he had some dealing with Echoes, and he said Damien Echoes has a hand in this some kind of way. And so from that point in time, Echoes sort of becomes a little target of the investigation. He makes some statements around certain people, and I think it got known. And so Miss Kelly's daddy said, hey, we better take you in and let you get down first. If you go in and you confess first, if you become the first one to confess, then you're going to get the best deal, you know. But whoever killed these boys are going to be electrocuted or put to death. So, you know, we better get you on in there and let you get the best deal first. And I think something along that line happened. And then once he got in and he started confessing, then the police would find, well, that's not exactly right. He ain't got this fact particular right. And they would then talk to him again, and then he would come back, and then he would remember something else. And, you know, they made a big deal about that. There was inconsistency in a confession. But the bottom line is that he was consistent in one thing. They did the killing.
Right.
That never changed.
And you know, being in prison 40 years, you know, you've met a lot of fellow inmates who weren't the brightest guys in the box. You know, wouldn't you say that most people who get arrested for crimes and they're interrogated by the police are really not very intelligent people, and that's not a major factor, you know, in your confession. Like, there's a lot of guys doing time that are way less educated or have less IQ than Miss Kelly.
There's people who, you know, who are kind of slow with it. There are people who kind of, you know, not educated, and it's easy for them to be manipulated. But there's also this mindset that guys who are out there stealing, a lot of times when these guys get caught, they're not the badasses in that interrogation room that they are on the prison jail tier, or they are on the streets in the neighborhood. You know, they're easily pressured into giving up information. You know, so I mean that it just depends upon what the nature of the suspect is. If he's a borderline mentally challenged person like Miss Kelly was, then you have to look at that as a factor. Was he pressured into falsely confessing? And I think, well, even if you accepted he was, and even if you accepted everything else, those guys went into that courtroom and they stood there and pled guilty. And you can say it was an offered plea, which means that you're not admitting guilt. The only thing you're admitting to is that you believe the state's evidence is strong enough to convict you. But if their lawyers truly believe that they were innocent, and they had a hearing come up, they pled guilty in August, and they had a hearing coming up in December, in which they would have presented their DNA evidence, and probably would have got a new trial, you know. And chances are, I believe if they had got a new trial, they had went free. But Echoes did not want to do that. He wanted this deal. He didn't want to run the risk of getting reconvicted. He wanted to get out as quick as he could to enjoy the celebrity he had accumulated, and they got their attorneys to go ahead and convince the others. Now, Miss Kelly he was tickled deaf. He's going along for the ride. Hell yeah, he'll go in and plead anything. I mean, he's got life, you know. He was tried separate from them. So he was tickled deaf to get that deal. He, you know, Johnny Depp wasn't waiting on him, you know. The only thing was waiting on him was some kind of parking garage attendant job there in West Memphis, you know. Eddie Vedder and Johnny Depp and Natalie Maines were all waiting out that hotel, on the roof of that hotel for Damien Echols.
Yeah, it's an interesting bunch that welcomed him in too. You know, it seems to be people that enjoy the same kind of beliefs that he does. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. When they went in and pled guilty, that became the seal, the absolute seal of my conviction that they are guilty. And their lawyers know they're guilty, and their lawyers would not have advised them. You have to understand, this deal was not worked out by the prosecutor coming to them and saying, look here, this was something their attorneys went to the prosecution with. This was something their attorneys were trying to work. So their attorneys had no real faith that the evidence would ultimately show that they didn't do this. They believed that the state had enough evidence to convict these guys, and only as an attorney sitting there, you have to ask, am I going to let an innocent man go in and plead guilty? No.
Very true. And there was that incident as well where Miss Kelly's lawyer wouldn't allow him to plead guilty, to make another confession, and pulled out a Bible and had him put his hand on the Bible and the whole thing. But he made one of his confessions was made in the presence of his attorney.
Yeah. And his attorney always believed he was telling the truth.
Billy Wayne Sinclair, we're toward the end of the show. What do you want to sum up? First, I'd like you to sum up your beliefs on the West Memphis 3, but then sum up the whole thing, your whole experience in your life. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, Ed, this is the first interview I've done in years. When I first got out, there were a few interviews, and, I suddenly told my wife, I said, I don't want to be a famous ex-convict who got out, a former award-winning journalist. I don't want to be any of those things anymore. I simply want to be a man who got out, who became a law-abiding person, who has met every responsibility that he's supposed to meet as a law-abiding person. I've honored my family. I've honored my wife. I've honored the trust that everybody placed in me. And at the end of the day, that's the fair measure that I will be, is that I will have done exactly what I said I would do, and I have become the person that I've always wanted to be, and that's it. I don't want to be famous. I don't want celebrity. I don't want any of those things. I don't want any special recognition. All I want to do is sit up on my front porch out here because I have a beautiful view of the hills out there. I want to sit out there in the morning time and look at those hills and be thankful that I'm alive and make sure that I keep that prison, the stink of that prison, as far away from me as I can get.
God bless you, man. Thank you so much for this interview. And I can tell you, I want to thank you because I know you're going to be an inspiration to a lot of people who listen to this show.
Thank you, Ed, and I appreciate talking to you.
Thank you. Keep in touch. Anything comes up you want to promote, let me know right away, okay?
Have a great day, Ed.
Thank you, sir. Billy Wayne Sinclair. What a story, guys. What a freaking story, man. The books are A Life in the Balance, the Billy Wayne Sinclair story. The other one I think I just... I did. I shut it down. But it was called Capital Punishment, I think it was. Capital Punishment, Billy Wayne Sinclair. Look it up that way. The books will be on the Opperman Report website in the bookstore there. Really enjoyed that show. What a life, man. 1965, he was arrested. And 2000. And what was it? 2006, right? You got out. Incredible. Okay, we'll be right back after these messages. A little bit more wrap up for you, okay, guys? This is your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. And if you're enjoying this show right now, there's more. You can get more. You can go to the Ed Opperman YouTube channel, and you could subscribe there. And we have archives of all of our past shows for over the past 3 years, about 200, 300 shows. You can also go to the Opperman Report Spreaker channel, and you could follow us there. Again, a ton of shows, about 300 shows on there. And whenever we do an impromptu show, an emergency type broadcast that we do during the week occasionally, you'll get an email notifying you of breaking news and spontaneous broadcasts that we may do during the week. You can also go to oppermanreport.com and become a member. If you become a member, you help support the free archives on Spreaker and YouTube, and you help support the free shows on Friday evening and on Saturday evening. Each of these shows, Friday evening and Saturday evening, are carried for free on 7 internet stations, okay? So you help support that, but also, too, at OppermanReport.com in the members section, we have exclusive content. Shows that are recorded during the week that are only available to members. So please check out OppermanReport.com and help support the show.
The son of a Polish immigrant who grew up in a Brooklyn tenement, Bernie Sanders. He went to public schools, then college, where the work of his life began, fighting injustice and inequality, speaking truth to power. Bernie moved to Vermont, won election and praise as one of America's best mayors. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families and for principle, opposing the Iraq War, supporting veterans. Now he's taking on Wall Street and a corrupt political system that holds up a rigged economy. Bernie's campaign is funded by over 1 million small contributions from people like you. He's fighting for living wages, equal pay, and tuition-free public colleges. Bernie Sanders.
People are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Bernie Sanders, husband, father, grandfather, an honest leader, building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
Check out strawmanmusic.com. Sean Duff is our webmaster here at the Opperman Report, and he's a very talented musician. He's part of a band called Strawman. They're based up there in Canada. Don't hold that against them. These are like-minded folks. If you like the shows you hear on the Opperman Report, you'll like the music that they have over at strawmanmusic.com.
Enough is enough. Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the 1930s. And then, after getting a huge taxpayer bailout because they were too big to fail, it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. That's crazy. I'm Bernie Sanders. My plan: break up the big banks who are strangling our economy and make them pay their fair share of taxes. Then we can invest in the middle class, expand Social Security, and provide universal college education. I'll rein in Wall Street behavior so they can't crash our economy again. Will they like me? No. Will they begin to play by the rules if I'm president? You better believe it. I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.
You know, you can get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, if you go to my website, emailrevealer.com. Now, this is a limited edition book, okay? And you can get a signed copy of this book, and it'll be personally autographed to you or whoever you want to give the book to as a gift. Once you have my signature on that book, you can copy the signature and put it on checks and pass them all over the world. Emailrevealer.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator.
He's fought injustice and inequality his whole life. Bernie Sanders. As a college student, he was arrested for challenging segregated housing. Bernie marched with Dr. King and thousands of others for civil rights. In Congress, Bernie stood up for working families on health care and jobs. Now he's taking on Wall Street banks and a corrupt political system that keeps in place a rigged economy. Bernie Sanders, a reformer who believes in ending racial profiling and mass incarceration so the justice system works for everyone. Bernie Sanders,
There is no president who will fight harder to end institutional racism and reform our broken criminal justice system.
Bernie Sanders, an honest leader building a movement with you to give us a future to believe in.
I'm Bernie Sanders, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Bernie 2016.